Hello and welcome back to my channel where I talk about Japan and the JET program. So if that interests you, then be sure to subscribe. Actually, at the time of recording this video, I'm only like 10 or 15 subscribers away from 1,000. That 1,000th subscriber could be you. So lots to talk about today. Last semester, I took a lot of time off over the New Year's period, and when I came back, I only really had 1 or maybe 2 days to plan and put together the whole semester. It was not a good time. I wouldn't recommend it, you guys. In fact, I'd been asked to plan a series of lessons about roleplay, which I've mentioned a few times in previous videos, so I'm finally going to talk about that. What I really wanted to do in this video is kind of give you guys some tips for lesson planning fast. Like if you've not got a lot of time, lesson planning efficiently, just really kind of minimizing your workload, because sometimes you do get in those situations where you're like, okay, I need to pull something together right now. So in this video, I'm going to use the real world example of me planning for those roleplay lessons to give you 5 tips on efficient lesson planning or lesson planning quickly. After that, I'm going to go through the various activities that I did throughout those lessons, or at least any that I haven't mentioned by that point. And then I'm going to talk about how I tested the students for those classes, how they were graded, and how I feel the semester went overall. Was it a successful series of lessons? Would I do it again? And so on. Also, don't forget to stay till the end if you want to find out how to download my lesson plans and materials for those roleplay classes, because they are available online for you guys to access. So yeah, we'll get to that in a bit, but for now, let's get started on those tips. Alright, so tip number 1 is to use English the students already know in new situations versus teaching all new English. So for example, I used to in my first year teach a different topic every single week, brand new topic. There's a lot of planning that goes into a whole new topic because there's so much vocabulary you have to teach. I always have to put together a PowerPoint, so I need to find pictures of all the vocabulary, put all that together, new worksheets and new everything, and every week it's all over again, something new. Whereas with a topic such as roleplay, it's much more general. So you're not actually teaching them new English, you're just providing them with new opportunities to use English they already know. And that is a lot less work for you, let me tell you that. Specifically in my lessons, I was using roleplay situations in which they meet foreigners in Japan, because this is relatable to them. It's a realistic possible situation, and there's so many different situations that could occur in. Tip number 2 is to plan long term. And this may sound counterintuitive when I'm giving tips on how to lesson plan quickly, but this will save you so much time in the long run, so stay with me. I think it's important to plan a kind of an overview for all of the classes from the get-go, because you don't want to teach one lesson, then go to plan the second and suddenly realize, oh, I really should have covered X, Y, and Z in the previous lesson. So for example, with my roleplay class, when I planned the lessons, just a very brief outline, it was literally as simple as Lesson 1, Introduction to Roleplay Concept and Simple Example with Script. Lesson 2, Multiple real-world examples and attempt roleplay without a script. Lesson 3, more advanced scenarios, explanation of test, and lots of speaking practice. And then lesson 4 was the test itself. And also something I'd suggest for planning long-term is knowing how you're gonna test the students, like kind of backwards planning almost, because if you have to test them on whatever you're teaching, you really need to know what that is so you can build towards that over the lessons. You have a direction you're going in, you're just naturally following a path, and that does save time rather than being like, oh, what should I do for lesson 2? And then, kind of making it up as you go along. That takes a lot more time because you don't really know what direction to go in. Okay, tip number 3 is don't be over ambitious. Don't try and cram a whole bunch of stuff into one lesson. Whether you have only one lesson to teach a topic or a series of lessons, don't try and cram too much into one, because that really requires a lot of serious planning for it to go well, because otherwise you're going to overwhelm the students. They're not really going to take anything in, and especially if it's not a series of lessons, they're just going to forget everything as soon as you move on to the next one anyway. If you just have one simple goal in the lesson, you can spend the whole time doing that and really ensuring understanding. You'll be able to spend less time planning, because even if there's problems or it's not going so well, you can be much more flexible within that class rather than, okay, it doesn't matter if you don't get it, we need to move on because we need to achieve X, Y, and Z. So for example, with me, in the first roleplay lesson, I provided them with a really simple script for a roleplay situation in which a foreigner approaches a Japanese person and asks for, it was a recommendation on where they can go shopping or something like that. And I just thought, right, how many activities can I make out of this one script? Because I just want them to be as familiar with this one possible situation so they are comfortable with the format of roleplay, they understand what the whole thing's going to be about for future lessons. So first I provided it to them with the sentences in the wrong order. They had to put them in the right order, obviously. Then I had them with their partner read the roleplay to each other speaking, and then switch roles and read it again. That's 2 activities now. Then I changed the details slightly and I said to them, okay, I want you to do it again, but this time I want you to ask for a recommendation on somewhere to eat dinner. Then I asked them to do it again, but without looking at the paper this time, so turn it over and let's go again. Then I also asked them, okay, we're gonna do it one more time, and in the script at the end, the 2 people say, okay, thank you, goodbye, goodbye. But this time I was like, no goodbye this time. Keep talking. And I just wanted them to talk for as long as possible and just improvise beyond that. So what I had them do is everyone stood up, and then when a pair couldn't think of anything else to say in English, they would sit down, and then the last pair standing who'd been talking the longest would win. So that's 5 activities off one script, and they're just the whole time getting more and more comfortable with this one script. It's a lot less to plan as well. I don't have to make so many materials or different worksheets or whatever else. So yeah, don't be over ambitious. Tip 4 is to use familiar activities. So specifically for me, for example, I always run a warm-up at the start of every lesson, and over time I've kind of built up a bank of warm-ups. And especially with an activity like a warm-up, it's not even often related to the topic, it's just to ease them into the lesson and get them in that English mindset. I don't want to spend any time lesson planning by making up a whole new activity. For example, in my Christmas lesson, for the warm-up, I wrote the word Christmas on the board and I said to them, okay, with your partner, write down as many words as you can using these letters, and the pair at the end with the most words is the winner. So this time I just wrote Happy New Year on the board and I had them do the same thing. And literally I hadn't even finished explaining the activity and a lot of them had already started. And it doesn't have to just be with warm-ups. If you can just find little ways to adapt or vary the familiar activities, it keeps it interesting and super easy to do. Finally, tip number 5. Don't be afraid to use Japanese in your lessons. Now, I actually made a whole video a few weeks back about when and when not to use Japanese in the classroom. So I will link that in the description so you can watch that. Or if you're kind of bored of this video, you can just click here and watch that now. But as a simple example, obviously, when they are role-playing, they should only be speaking in English, but maybe the particulars of each roleplay can be provided to them in Japanese. I don't want them to spend a lot of time translating what they're meant to be talking about in English. I just want them to talk in English. I'd rather spend more time actually role-playing than translating situations I want them to roleplay. And I mean, it depends how much time you have, but 3 lessons actually wasn't very much to prepare them for this test, so I really had to be as efficient as possible and cut as many corners as possible. And it also saves you a lot of time in the planning, thinking, okay, I can just tell them this in Japanese, so I don't have to spend a lot of time preparing how I'm going to explain it. And I mean, there's a difference between being efficient and being lazy. Don't get lazy and just start doing everything in Japanese, but there is a time and place when I think it's very appropriate. So yeah, for more on that, then check out that other video after this one. But yeah, those are my tips for fast lesson planning. So now let's talk about some of the other activities I ran throughout that series of lessons. And don't forget to stay till the end to find out how to access all the materials for these activities and the accompanying lesson plans. So in the first lesson, I also gave a personal story of when I had to approach a Japanese person in Osaka when I needed some help, just to provide some context and to make them think, oh, you know, this could happen to me. I explained roleplay as a concept. So basically for each roleplay scenario, I provided a situation, 2 roles, one of the foreigner and one of the Japanese person, and 2 sets of goals, one for each role. And I did that basically for every scenario, and then when I tested them at the end, it was a similar kind of situation, so they were very familiar with it. Also, in regards to the goals, this was the best way to change the difficulty of each roleplay. You can increase the number of goals, the specificness or kind of more general nature of the goals. So for example, one I did early on was making a reservation at a restaurant. There's only really one way that conversation can go down, so it was a lot easier for them. They had a lot more direction. Whereas later I would do something like meeting a foreigner at a party, and the goal of the foreigner might be, oh, they want to make friends, so please make a plan with someone at the party. It's much more general, so they have to use more improvisation and be a bit more creative with English, and that can really change the difficulty of each roleplay. I had them brainstorm possible situations in which they could meet foreigners in Japan or in which they might interact with foreigners, which helped them again make it more relatable and put more context on the whole thing. And just the more relatable it is, the more engaged they're going to be, the more motivation they'll have. And I guess the main activity I did, which was in the 3rd lesson, was a kind of speed dating style roleplay activity. And they weren't, role-playing being on dates. Each pair had a different roleplay. I'd give them a minute to read it, 2 minutes to roleplay it, and then they would change their papers around, pass them back, and have a new one and repeat. And we'd just do that a bunch of times. Now, this was a very important activity and it really helped them a lot, but it was very difficult for them actually, and it was quite hard at the time to gauge the difficulty. But I think because when I'm role-playing with them, it's a lot easier because I know what they're trying to say and I can kind of guide them in the right direction. Whereas if they're doing it with their partner, if they're both a bit lost, it's very difficult. And also it turned out 2 minutes was really not enough time either. So I would definitely change that activity if I did it again. So now let's talk about the test, how I ran that, how it went, how the semester went as a whole. Was it a success? I gave them a piece of paper all in Japanese explaining how the test was going to be run, and also a kind of rubric so they knew exactly how to get the varying points. So I'll put that here in English, but I did give it to them in Japanese. So basically in the test I have 3 situation cards like this. They would choose one at random, and on each one in Japanese there's the situation, information on the student's role, and their goals for the roleplay test. They would always play the part of the Japanese person. I would always be the foreigner. Basically, they would get a portion of the points. I think it was about 50% of the marks were just for achieving the goals, the 3 goals. Then there was extra points available for continuing the conversation beyond the goals, and also for their delivery, how confident they speak, eye contact, things like that. And also for the test, I told them I'm not gonna end the test. It's gonna go on until you say goodbye. I'm just gonna keep talking until that point. And I did that because, as I said, some of the points were for continuing the conversation beyond the goals, and I didn't want to cut them off before they had a chance to do that if they were just thinking. But what that meant is that it took so much longer than I thought per student. So for each class, I only got through about half the students during the test lessons. So what that meant is for like a whole week or 2 almost, I was basically staying late every day after school catching up on roleplay tests, and the students often had to stay late as well, which sucked. Also, I could tell that the students were incredibly nervous during the test, and I think that was in part due to the fact that it was the first time we'd done a speaking test that was like fully improvised. It wasn't like prepared sentences, they were just memorizing. And also, as I said, that speed dating activity was quite difficult for them, and I felt like they came in thinking that's the level of difficulty it was going to be, even though it was definitely easier doing it with me, a native English speaker. And what that resulted in was that a lot of the time, as soon as they achieved their goals, they'd be like, okay, thank you, goodbye, and end it there without trying to really get any of those extra points. So overall, how it went is that although the average score was lower than I expected, they all achieved their goals, and there was a consistency in the kind of understanding and knowledge for the topic that they'd all learned. So to me, that's a success. That's a great success. Especially because the levels of the students' English is so varied in the classes. The fact that they all kind of got on the same page more or less, that is a really good sign to me. And although there's certainly things I would change, it's always good to improve when you repeat things, I would definitely run it again. I'd say it was probably the smoothest semester I've ever had in my life as a teacher. I was so chuffed with how it went overall. If you guys want to access the lesson plans and the materials for those roleplay lessons, then you can get them on Patreon, my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. Basically, every month I post a new lesson plan and all of the associated materials there for you to download, the PowerPoints, the worksheets, anything else that I have, and I'll type up some general notes about any tips I have for how to run that lesson. At least the first roleplay lesson is up there now, so the next few months I'll be posting the other lesson plans and stuff for that. So definitely check that out if that's something you're interested in. There's being more and more added all the time, so the bank of lesson plans there is going to build up a lot. Okay, I suspect this will be a very long video, but we made it to the end. If you learned something, then hit that like button to show your appreciation. And if you want to see more tips on teaching in Japan on the JET program from me, then be sure to subscribe. Thank you very much, guys. I'll see you next week.